Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Well, it's a means of illustrating a story. Sometimes it's the entire story if it's done properly. As a journalist, I was never a photographer. Sometimes I was a writer who had to take pictures, and that's a definite distinction. I can take a good picture if it presents itself to me, but I've seen professional photographers create a picture, and that is a skill that I am amazed and baffled by, and vaguely am envious of.
Okay. Well, Brent Olson, first of all, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I don't know anything about you. I don't research. I don't look at the photos until I meet the person. And then all I do is share the person's energy and interest and ideas and experience. And yeah, really great to meet you and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Okay, so what city are you in right now?
I am 180 miles from the closest city.
Okay.
I live in western Minnesota, which is on the edge of what 100 years ago was called the Great Plains of the United States. Minnesota is in the north and in the middle of the United States. Okay. The county I live in is Big Stone County.
Okay.
And it is roughly the size of Hong Kong, and 5,000 people live here.
Oh, wow. Have you been to Hong Kong?
I have never been to Hong Kong. I had a gig in China, but in Hangzhou.
Okay.
But I've never been to Hong Kong.
So one of the great things about these conversations is that like you live your life, you have your thing going, and then you'll say some things. And so you say journalist, you say you lived in Hangzhou, you lived in China as a gig. This is going to be great. This is really good to meet you. I'm really fascinated. This is awesome.
Well, the China thing was, I had a buddy who was teaching school there, and I got an email from him. He said, and he was saying a bunch of other stuff, and he said, well, you should come to China and teach my kids a writing class.
Oh, wow.
I was like, yeah, that'd be fun, ha ha ha. And then 5 minutes later, I was corresponding with one of my editors at Meredith Corporation, a big media corporation in the United States. And I put a PS on it, and I was writing for Successful Farming, which was the biggest farm magazine in the United States.
Oh,
and
wow.
I put a PS on it. I said, hey, and you should send me to China, and I could write an article about soybeans or something.
Oh, wow.
And I was joking.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 minutes later, I got an email back from him saying, what's a ticket to China cost?
Nice.
And that was the amount of planning that went into it.
Okay, so the photo I have here is a title. No, I don't have a title. It's a photo of, well, it's taken in the day in the summer. They're like black-eyed Susans. There's some grasses. It's like a garden. There's a low kind of cottage with something growing, like it's like a green roof. So there are like grasses or something growing on the roof. There's a flag. Is that Denmark? Danish flag?
There's a Norwegian flag and a Welsh flag.
Right. Norway. Okay. What am I looking at, Brent?
That was when people ask me what I did last summer, I say nothing practical.
Nice.
I live on the farm my great-grandparents homesteaded, and there was an old barn there that was torn down, but there was a cornerstone where he had chiseled 1897 into it when he built the barn.
Oh, wow.
And I thought I needed to do something with that. So I made a writer's shack out of it. I built a stone wall and
wow.
got some timbers for a roof. And a couple of years ago, we spent some time in the Faroe Islands. and I saw a building with that color scheme with a grass roof and red trim and black siding, and I was just smitten by it.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to recreate that here.
Yeah. No, it's great. So, like, again, I have to point out that if people want to see the photo, I mean, it's a podcast, so people can't, like, to see them, they have to go to the website or they have to go to YouTube. So the photo is of this writer's shack, I guess. White door, brown, dark brown sort of walls. Okay, so I come from the world of writing, right? My first degree was in creative writing, so I know that world. You're a writer. You go
Yep.
into little like rooms of your own to craft your work. Is it purely journalism, or do you also write books? Like what's that about?
I've got 8 published books,
Oh, nice.
4 collections of essays, a memoir, and 3 novels. And to make it even more complicated, one of the novels is a genre thriller. One is a kind of post-apocalyptic guide,
Mm-hmm.
and the third one is an alternative history,
Wow.
where the working title was A Happy Ending for the World.
Nice.
I was trying to fix the world I'm living in, and I just had to go back 1,000 years in order to set it on the right track.
Okay. So Brent, like, did you grow up in Minnesota,
Yes, yep, yeah, I've lived here my whole life.
but got to Faroe Islands?
I've filed stories from 20 some countries on 6 continents.
What? Wait. What? Okay. So you get sent to different places, like in China,
Yep,
to file stories?
yep.
Is this for mag? Okay, so
Magazines, yeah, yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, I'm a lucky man. There's no getting around it.
So how did you fall into journalism? Like, did you study journalism? Like, what's that all about?
This is a little embarrassing because because I have absolutely no credentials to be a writer.
Nobody needs them. You speak the language, you write the language. That's it. It's enough.
And when I was about 40 years old, I just woke up one morning and said, I'm going to take a whack at this.
What?
And yeah. That's just the truth.
That's amazing. So when you're 40, you decide I'm going to be a journalist.
Yeah, yeah. I'm I'm always a little. I'm blushing as I sit here, but that's just the truth. I mean, that's what I did, and I went to our local newspaper and said, and keep in mind this is a county with 5,000 people, so there was only a few thousand readers, and I said, Lois, you and I are the only ones who know this, but I think I'm a writer. And then after I wrote for her for a while, I went to a larger entity and said, well, I'm a newspaper columnist. And I said, I'll write for you for free for 6 months. And at
Oh,
the end of
wow.
that time, you'll like my work so much, you'll want to start paying me. And my editor, a woman named Sherry Zagurski, who's still my editor, wrote me after 3 months and said, our fiscal year starts in January, so can we start paying you 2 months early? And
Oh, nice.
yeah, it
Nice.
was great.
You've blown my mind. Okay, so you just decided I'm going to start writing. So what world of is it any kind of journalism, any kind of stories, human interest, or is it like farming? Like what's the
The title of my column, I've had a weekly column for 30 years now.
holy shit.
So 1,700 columns.
Wow.
And the title of it is Independently Speaking, which means I really just write about whatever the hell I want.
Nice.
Sometimes it's my grandchildren, sometimes it's ducks, sometimes it's politics. It just depends upon what I decide to do that day.
Okay, so part of my little thing is, we all get a bucket of seconds in our lives, and we don't really know where we're going to end up and how do we spend those seconds. In your case, you're like, I think I'm a writer. And then you're like, okay, let's see if I am. And for whatever reason, your destiny or whatever goes in that direction. which brings you to all these countries, which is just astounding. So let's get to know who you were as a kid. Like, did you write ever? Like, what is it? Because writing is creative expression, right? It's like, it's actually expressing thought. I mean, did you do anything in that way before?
This is a story I tell if I'm in a classroom,
Mm-hmm.
teaching a writing class. When I was 12, I started writing a novel.
Mm.
And when I got into it, like 15 pages, I showed it to my parents. And then later that day, I was coming down the stairs in our house and I heard them in the kitchen around the corner and they were kind of making fun of it. They were joking about it between just the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
After I became a father myself, I realized that if you can't laugh at your kids with your spouse, you're going to lose your mind.
Right.
Uh, they didn't mean anything by it, and they certainly didn't mean for me to hear it. But I heard it, and I was just crushed.
Crushed. Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't write anything again
Oh
till I
shit.
was 40.
What?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I didn't write anything for any sort of publication. So
Wow.
that's why I tell kids, you got to hang in there. You've got to, if you're going to be a writer, you have to let people read what you've written,
Uh huh.
and you have to listen to their advice, and most importantly, you have to know when to ignore that advice.
Even if it's your parents. Yep. Got it.
Yep.
I'm astounded. Okay, so I'm assuming you have a book, or
Yes,
let's promote one of your book. What's a book title that we want to promote?
the book I'm pushing right now because I think it may be as good as I can write. Uh, it's called Between the Helpless and the Darkness,
Okay.
and it's the alternative history where where I changed the path of an arrow by an inch 1,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I transformed the world we are living in today.
I love that idea. I love it.
Okay, so there was a Norwegian king called Harald Hardrada, and he was killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, trying to conquer England. And he was really an incredible man. I mean, he had spent time as the bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, and he had this amazing life. And he was just consumed by ambition and everything else that a king is. And I went, well, what if this guy wasn't killed at Stamford Bridge? And he still had all these immense capabilities and qualities, but the ambition and the avarice and everything else was kind of burned out of him by this humiliation. So I put him and his followers on boats to Iceland and then to Nova Scotia, where they are the people who make the first contact with
Mm-hmm.
with the First Nations here in America. And it's more collegial. It's more back and forth. It's more equal,
Mm-hmm.
and that sets the tone for the entire continent.
Wow. That just a little ambitious, maybe, right, Brent? Just a little.
Well, you have to, you can't let common sense get in the way of your ambitions. I'm just saying.
Aw, this is great. Okay, so I'm assuming that's you in the background with your daughter, your wife. Is that you in the photo? It looks like Machu Picchu.
Yes, yes, it's me and my wife.
Okay, very sweet.
That was a very yeah, and that was a few years ago. Our 49th anniversary is coming up in a couple weeks.
Oh, well, congratulations and
So
respect.
she's gone every place I've gone except I had a gig in Uganda once where she didn't go, and I spent the whole time going, oh God, I wish Robin could see this. So
Aw.
so we are pretty much joined at the hip.
So you were sent to Machu Picchu for work?
No, I was sent to Argentina for work, and my wife in another life would have been an archaeologist.
Nice.
So we swung by. I mean, Machu Picchu was just on the way home, so we swung by.
Amazing. So the photo is of you two seated on a large slab of rock. I've never been, so I don't know the territory, but basically you're in the foreground, both of you, beautifully looking at the photographer, looking like a sweet couple. And in the background, I mean, it's a dramatic shot in that it's a weird shot because the horizon seems tilted. It seems tilted a little bit, but you two seem on the right axis, in line with the main sort of mountain peak of Machu Picchu, and then there's all the ruins below. It looks like a slightly overcast day, slightly chill because you're wearing kind of warm clothes. A Minnesota spring, so to speak,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like okay. So why did you think of using this photo as the second image in this little hour-long journey?
Well, because my wife is an enormous part of my life.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we met when we were 18. We got married when we were 20. We've been together, since 1973, married since 1975. She is she really is just the center of the universe.
Oh,
So now it would be impossible to pick out four photos to depict my life and not have her in one of them.
well, you are the sweet. You're very. This is great to meet you, Brent. I mean, like, this is amazing. Okay. So, would you say that in your travels, this was a kind of an especially poetic, moving kind of event, or it's just like, what is it about the place? And the photo is super sweet. Like, but what is it about, like, if you were to dive into like the meaning of this, like, what is it about this particular image at this particular time that really resonates?
I don't know. I think because we came, I was doing a story in Argentina where I got my camera stolen.
Mm,
Uh, so I was a little grumpy. And then we got to Peru and got to Cusco, it was the Inca capital,
mm-hmm,
before the Spaniards came. And it's just a wonderful place. I mean, it's got one of these. I mean, when I travel, I love markets,
mm-hmm.
and it has a fantastic market, and there's all these great buildings, and it's one of the few places I've been where where it almost looks like the Spaniards never existed.
Okay,
Okay,
gotcha.
so most of North and South America, the original culture was just swamped and overwhelmed and disappeared. And you get to Cusco, and it's like, no, it's this is the original culture is the culture that matters, that you
Mm-hmm.
see. And I really was kind of smitten by that idea. And Machu Picchu, they say this professor from Yale discovered it, but everyone who lived there knew it was there.
Of course.
So that I found sort of funny, and I liked the shot. I
No, it's a
liked
great
I
shot.
technically liked the shot.
It's a great shot. Yeah. So, when you get sent, okay, do you remember the story that you were sent to write?
It was there's an organization called the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists,
Mm-hmm.
and they have their convention in a different country every year. And this year it was in Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
and I wrote several stories
Right.
while I was there. The one I kind of wrote was they took us out in the country, and you saw the gauchos, who are these incredibly proud people with this
Mm.
stunning history, and their life is disappearing because being a rancher and herding cattle is being replaced by soybean fields.
Right.
And so it was like seeing the end of a lifestyle that was very kind of bittersweet for me.
Yeah. So, okay. So why don't you tie that back to your understanding of your part of the U.S. and the dwindling lifestyle of ranchers. Is that something? Is that a thing for you that you've seen, or not really?
It's a huge thing for me because one of the reasons I quit farming was it wasn't nearly as much fun anymore.
Ah,
It was becoming a bigger business, and there was a lot more chemicals and pesticides and things like that being involved, and it was something. It was a game I no longer wanted to play.
mm-hmm,
Now, right now, we've got our farm, and I've got an orchard, and we've got chickens and ducks and raspberries and blueberries, and we raise a lot of our own food, and I make a lot of our. I've done all the remodeling and building in our house, and I've
mm,
sort of invented the life I want to live, uh,
nice.
which is a step. It's a step off kilter from the lives most of the people around me are living.
Yeah, for sure. In my professional life, right, I do business consulting and all this stuff. And so one of the things we talk about is about how with industrialization really pulled so many people out of the mud of poverty, right? So in a way, it's amazing. Like you make, you know, millions of industrialized products or industrialization of agriculture, whatever it is. So you make, the products cheaper and more accessible and all this stuff. So in that sense, it's miraculous. But what we also say is that the service, one-to-one, person-to-person service, really is kind of, I don't know, is the foundation really is of civilization. So would you say, in terms of how, like, it sounds to me that you buckled against this idea of industrializing farming, your own farming, or your own farmed way of life or whatever. Now, again, I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth, but why don't you talk about that? So now I've introduced this idea into your head. Like, what do you think? How does that inform your desire to go, hey, you know what? This game, it's not for me anymore. I'm going to go be a writer of all the things.
I'm not saying it made sense. We've got to make sure we keep that in there all the time. I'm not saying any of my choices make sense. Well, I did. It just you hit the nail on the head. It was a game I no longer wanted or was willing to play,
Mm,
and I found an alternative path, and I could still live where I've spent my whole life living where I wanted to live and doing what I wanted to do. So I feel that makes me extraordinarily fortunate. I
mm-hmm,
mean, I haven't had an actual boss since 1976.
mm-hmm.
Uh, so that makes me lucky. And
You're,
but modern agriculture, it's true. The fact that it used to take 90% of the population to raise food, and now it takes 4%. You know, in a lot of ways, makes modern society possible. But
yeah,
on the other hand, if I go into a grocery store, there's entire aisles that I don't even go down because I know there's nothing on in those aisles I'm willing to eat.
mm,
Some of this highly processed food and overly sugared and overly salted.
right,
It's stuff I won't put in my body anymore.
mm-hmm,
So it's oh, okay. Here's an example. Huge portions of the United States is tied up in producing corn for ethanol.
yep,
Okay. Okay. I was on the board of a cooperative that built an ethanol plant 20 some years ago.
mm-hmm,
Now, when we started to build it, our motivation was that the octane enhancer in gasoline was MTBE,
mm-hmm,
which is a carcinogen,
yeah,
and it's persistent in groundwater. So we were going, wouldn't it be great if we could replace MTBE with ethanol, which
mm-hmm,
is, natural? And we were right. But the problem is it worked too well. There was too much money in it. So
mm,
all of a sudden, people were building ethanol plants all over, and it swamped the market to replace MTBE. And then they needed some place to put the ethanol, so they said, "Well, we'll just run all the cars on it."
Mm-hmm.
So what started out as kind of a benevolent idea turned into a horrible idea.
Okay. Right. I love that our conversation went in that direction. I love that.
Okay.
No, because it's great. It's like I'm basically being schooled. Yeah, let's talk about, okay, so your experience and expertise in farming, also just because you know what it is to kind of work the land, and then you're also writing as a journalist for, which is, journalism is about finding the horizon. Like where are things changing, right? Like what's happening here that's different, right? And reporting on it. So why don't you tell me something like your most recent story? What is a like a recent finding or recent thing that you noticed that should get some airtime? Like, for example, I didn't know about the ethanol thing. And what is it? MLTB?
MTBE.
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 Okay. So what's the most recent finding that people need to know about?
I, something I was talking about today is I don't understand why farmers in the United States are so angry. They really are. They really are. And a lot of them are kind of fervent Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just utterly baffling to me because, because if you own 200 acres of land and an acre of land, there's like 1.5 acres of land in a football pitch.
Yep.
So if you own 200 acres of land, you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
You're worth $1 million. And I bet I know 50 millionaires in my little part of the town. And of course, the way they dress and the way they act, they're indistinguishable from people who are in their last dime.
Yeah.
But they've lived fortunate lives. A lot of them, have houses in Arizona and travel abroad in the winter and things like that. But they seem really angry, like the world is against them, and I can't understand that.
That's interesting. So as you're saying this, I'm looking at this photo of this beautiful couple who's smiling and doesn't seem angry at all in this incredible place of Machu Picchu. And let's move on to the next photo.
Okay.
This is great. Okay, so it's a photo of us. Listen, I'm not going to judge a person by the size of their tractor, but it's a small tractor. And in the scoop, there are 5 kids, ranging in the age of, let's say, from 4 till about 8 or 9, I guess. It's photographed in I'd say autumn or spring. They're all wearing kind of hats, like they're kind of wearing warm clothing. The photographer is like standing on the gravel road. All you see of the scoop is about maybe 5 feet off the ground. And in the scoop are like 5 kids just staring, just smiling brightly. All of them are smiling. It's so nice. Looking at the photographer, probably shot in, I'll say the morning. Probably around like 9 or 10 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's this?
So those are my grandchildren.
Nice.
And what you didn't say is that it's interesting is that we have nearly the full range of melanin in the human race in those children, from
sure, yeah, okay, so we'll
very
say
dark to practically transparent. But 3 of my grandchildren were born in Ethiopia.
Okay.
And that's just that's they are really they are central to my world.
Nice.
And they all live reasonably close, and we live kind of a cliche. I mean, they come over for Sunday dinner, and we have dinner for 12 every week, and
oh wow.
And they hang around and play in the yard afterwards. And
so how many kids do you have?
I have 3.
3. Okay, respect. And they live close to you, or do they live farther away?
Relatively within an hour.
Okay.
And an hour isn't bad because I have to drive 60 miles to buy a shirt. But But our oldest son was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, and now he's a tool and die maker,
Mm-hmm.
which is ranked in an apocalypse is ranked the second most useful profession after physician.
You're right. You're a weirdo, man.
But it's true. He literally can make anything out of steel.
That's
And
amazing.
in fact, some days I'll say, "Hey, what are you doing today?" And I can hear him deciding if I'm smart enough to understand the answer or not.
Mm-hmm.
And our oldest daughter is a therapist, and our youngest daughter is a preschool teacher.
Okay. Ranked number 3 and 4 in the apocalypse.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So is this photo on your property, on your land, on your farm?
Yep, it's my kids, my tractor, my property.
Nice. So okay, why don't you draw a line from, okay, so like these kids who, I mean, how old is this photograph? Is it recent or?
A couple years old.
Okay, so your grandkids are still young.
Now they're 17, 16, 15, 12, and 8.
Nice, nice. Okay. So it's always an interesting kind of exercise to compare like what was growing up for you at their age versus what growing up for them is at, now. And, like you're young on a farm, like why don't you make that connection between them now and you then?
I was the youngest of 3 children. My sisters were like 5 years older. And we lived in kind of 2 different households because as soon as I started school, my mom went back to college to become a teacher.
Okay.
And so I lived a really autonomous childhood. I mean, I spent a lot of time alone, spent a lot of time outside and making things and breaking things, and I had a horse and rode around pretending I was Davy Crockett and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So I got a motorcycle at a young age, fixed it up. One of the first line on my resume is I say, when people ask me if I need help, I say, no, thanks, I can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the second line is, that's gotten me a lot of trouble over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
third line is, I still say it.
Nice.
So it's true. I always growing up, I did a lot of things. And so I grew up with the expectation that I could do a lot of things.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and the kids, my grandkids' lives are a lot more structured than mine ever were.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably all smarter than me, but they haven't had quite the growth challenges that I had.
Right. And I think, the resilience that comes from that, look, can we paint with a broad brush and decide, that one's better than the other? The outcomes are, who knows what the outcomes will be? I mean, because it's true that, like, my daughter falls in the same age bracket as your grandkids. Super switched on, super access, like incredible access to information and range of ideas and experience. But on the other hand, like many kids, like most kids, it's a little less, more structured than say, and chances are my growing up was just a little bit more structured than your growing up. You know what I mean? Like, but I think, how do your grandkids internalize their experience? I mean, like, to be able to come as a refuge, to come to your land and have that on weekends is an amazing experience for them, to just broaden their understanding.
Yeah, and I try, like when I built that writer's shack, it has a concrete foundation with
Mm-hmm.
electric heat in it, and they help me pour the concrete.
Nice. Nice.
And the oldest girl, who weighs half as much as I do, was the one we put on a plank in the middle of the concrete to trowel it smooth, because
Nice.
she was light enough to not bother it.
Right.
So I like giving them those small triumphs.
Yep.
I think, I mean, a small triumph is also only a small failure.
Right.
So the stakes are lower, but I think it helps build your confidence.
Sure. Sure. Okay, so let's just say somebody who's listening, who's thinking, okay, maybe I want to be a writer, or maybe I want to start something. What, like, go back to the time when you kind of decided, like, you know what, maybe I'll try to write. So you went to the community newspaper, I guess, and say, I mean, like, was it like a very kind of spontaneous decision, or was it one that you got to over time?
I think it got to me over time. It took it took a while to work up my nerve, and this is funny. I left out the most embarrassing part of the story. The first three things I wrote, I sent off to the Farm Journal, which at that time was the second biggest farm magazine in the United States, and they liked them. And they
Mm-hmm.
were talking to me about being a regular in their magazine and getting my bio and everything.
Oh, nice.
And then they were headquartered in Philadelphia, and they moved to a different office building. And in the move, they lost my work that I had sent them.
Oh.
So the editor, who I had been corresponding with for a couple months, said, this is what happened, and can you send us copies? And we had gone back and forth a dozen times, and I was kind of thinking we were friends. And I sent her, the copies of what I wrote, and then I put a little PS on, so try not to lose these, ha
Mm-hmm.
ha ha. And she wrote back and she said, okay, we don't need these, and we don't need anything you write ever again.
What?
Yeah, yeah. And later on, after I got to know people in the industry and I would tell them that story, they'd go, oh, yeah, that sounds like something she'd do.
Oh,
But
wow.
But at that moment, I was like, oh my God, there's one person on the planet willing to give me money for what I write, and now she hates me.
Yeah, but for what? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's very, she was having a very bad day.
yeah, yeah. So it was after that I went, after I recovered my nerve, that's when I went
Mm-hmm.
to my local paper.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Okay. So, I mean, that's a very inspiring story in terms of, like, what is, what is your relationship to failure in terms of either publishing or in terms of life, in terms of, like, you've said little failures already. So already I can tell that you have a kind of a relationship or an understanding of what it is to get setbacks, right? So,
I've had enormous failures, personally and professionally. Even this book that I'm so proud of, I had an
the
agent in
title, what's the title?
Between the Helpless and the Darkness.
Nice.
I had a agent in New York. I mean, and really a very prestigious agency. I mean, I was beyond over the moon when
Mm-hmm.
he called me up, and he said, I love your stuff. I'm going to take it to publishers, and they're going to see it, and they're going to say, where the hell has this guy been? And it's just going to be wonderful. It was the most excited I've ever been professionally,
Mm-hmm.
and he was wrong. They just didn't like it. I mean,
Okay.
he had all the entree you could imagine. He would send me copies of emails where they'd go, oh, Richard, thanks for bringing this book over. It was so good to see you. We need to have coffee again soon.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but we're going to have to pass on this. And the common theme was it was too quiet,
Mm-hmm.
meaning there was no sex and not quite enough violence.
Mm.
And he finally just gave up and gave me back the rights after he had
Oh.
queried every major publisher in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And it just broke my heart.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just devastated. And but you get devastated, and I farmed for 30 years. And in those 30 years, I lost 2 crops to drought and 2 to floods
Mm-hmm.
and 2 to hailstorms.
Wow.
So you just, if you're going to live a life, you're going to have to expect to have things go south sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Famously, uh, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter had it rejected again and again and again. And when they finally got accepted, it was like, yeah, we'll print 500. Who knows? Maybe it'll work.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
book publishing is like that,
It is because you don't know. I mean, and the best part, the worst part about writing now is that most of the small presses have kind of disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
The people that only did like 4 or 5 books a year, so they weren't looking for big names and blockbusters.
Yeah.
That ship has kind of sailed. But the best thing is, you can self-publish now.
Yeah.
I mean, and Walt Whitman self-published Leaves of Grass, and that's a pretty
Mm-hmm.
solid recommendation.
Yep.
So that gives people an opportunity to put a lot of bad writing out into the world,
Yep.
but also
That too.
also to get some good stuff out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you say, put the good stuff out there. I see this photo of your 5 grandkids. So nice. Okay. Hard left, hard right. It's a photocopy, a scan of a black and white image. It says observe golden wedding date. And then Mr. and Mrs. Adolf Olson. Okay, so it's 2 people. This photo looks pretty old. Is one
Really
of them
old.
it's hard to know if what she is holding could be a shotgun. It's one of those funny things.
Well,
And then
it's a photocopy of 100-year-old newspaper, so
yeah.
the quality is maybe not what you were hoping for.
No, it's actually exactly what it needs to be. This is great. So
But
who is this? What is this?
okay, there's 2 stories there. Number one, these are my great grandparents. Okay,
Nice.
they emigrated from Norway in 1880. Okay,
Okay.
okay. The first story is they left a place where their family had lived for 1,000 years, maybe longer, in order to do the right thing for their family. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they looked around at the spot they were in and they went, there's no future here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got if we're going to make a family and make a future for them, we've got to do something else. And they had the guts to get up and leave it all behind and come here.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't easy. I mean, they had 3 children die and lived through all of the things between 1880 and the 1930s, but came out the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the best story about this is you look at that picture and you see 2 old people, really kind of beat up and grim and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But I found some old letters in Norwegian and I paid someone to translate them, and they were love letters. My great grandfather
Aww.
wrote to my great grandmother the year before they were married.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the lines in the letters is, "My dear, my heart is on fire for you."
Aww.
Now you look at that picture, you wouldn't guess his heart had ever been on fire.
I don't know. I
But
like.
and of course their first child was born 3 months after they were married, so
Mm-hmm.
apparently it wasn't only his heart that was on fire. But
Oh man.
I love that. I love that you see this picture and then reading those letters, you're going, oh yeah, there's stuff that we can't see that
Mm-hmm.
went into who they are, and that is
Yep.
still maybe there down deep inside,
Yep.
and you can't forget that's still there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's what I see. I see this guy called Brent Olson who has a tie to Norway from the writer's shack that you built. And the second image is of you and Robin, right? Your wife?
Yep.
Robin, in Machu Picchu, which is a lifetime away if you go back to, the 1800s, right? For somebody to go from, it's pretty astounding. And you're just this softie, this super sweet softie who's just, who kind of puts this image of your great-grandparents or grandparents?
Great-grandparents.
Great-grandparents. And what you noticed is that, and what kind of made them really, what connected you to them is a discovery of these love letters, which is, a little bit, I don't know, nosy of you maybe? Like, do you think they'd want you to read their love letters? Like, dude.
I don't know. Well, they should have burned the damn letters then if they didn't want anyone to read them.
Yeah, but no, that's really beautiful and sweet. Okay. So, but I find it fascinating that you go into like how many decades or how many years were you farming?
I farmed for 30 years.
Okay. Strong hands, hard work.
Yep.
Lost crops.
Yep.
And then you moved into what is the daintiest of jobs, which is like tapping with your little itty bitty fingers on your computer or typewriter. It's just like, I mean, no calluses are ever earned by a writer, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then what you notice and are connected to are these love letters, which is like just beautiful. So here's me responding to you. Now you take it from here. Imagine there's a question in there and answer that question.
I don't know. People are complicated. People are complicated. It's you see, and I farmed for 10 years as a writer too.
Okay.
My careers overlapped. And that really is the guardian of my ego. Because I tell people I'm a better farmer than any writer I know, and I'm a better writer than any farmer I know. So that helps me maintain my self-esteem. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of farmers have kind of a lyrical touch in them.
Okay.
They like watching the sun come up, and they like, they talk about the animals they see when they're in the fields, and they cry when their dog dies and things like that. So yeah, I mean, at the time and place when I was growing up, farming was a callous, heavy profession.
Yeah.
But there's people are complicated. There's some hidden depths. I try and remember that there's something hidden in almost everyone you meet. As a journalist, it's been my opinion and my experience that everyone has at least one terrific story in them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes maybe it's only one. But there's always at least one story in there that if you dig deep enough, you can find.
Right. As you say that, I'm going to dig a little deeper for a second. What story, what article, what event did you cover that you thought, wait a second, this one stands out. This one's pretty full on.
Do you know the story about George Floyd? Floyd getting murdered in
Yeah, just basically quickly, you want to recount it, or do you want me to recount it?
Well, it was a black guy who was basically murdered by 3 policemen who did it because they refused to acknowledge his worth as a human being. He was just, and it was, it's not something that would have happened to a white person.
Mm-hmm.
It really had happened because, it's almost undeniable.
Yeah, and at the time, if I can just interrupt for a second, at the time, I remember in this particular case, they were subduing him and essentially choked him, prevented him from breathing.
Kneeled on his neck.
neck until he
Yeah.
died, and the line
Yeah.
was, "I can't breathe." Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I interrupted. Please go ahead.
So I thought about that, and I wrote an article about the fact that I have a black grandson, and that in this very small place where we live, he's not really seen as black. He's seen as Brent and Robin's grandson.
Mm-hmm.
Some point, he's going to have to move out into the larger world and meet people who will judge him on this just one characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's probably as good as I can write. And there's an organization called the American Agricultural Editors Association. They voted it their number one editorial of the year in the United States.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
And these are a bunch of farm writers,
Yeah.
So for it to affect them, I felt I nailed that one and said something that mattered.
Yeah. Is that article online? Like, can we add it to the show notes?
Sure. Yeah. I can. Yeah. Do you want me to send it to you?
Yeah, I'd like to like, if there's a link, I'll include the link in the show notes so people can read it.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be hard to find. I mean, I got a Substack column, and I've got Brent Olson online, and I've got an Independently Speaking Facebook page. But
Right.
I'll find and send it to you, and that way
Yeah.
it'll be easier to find.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really great. So one of the in my many lives, in my many careers, I've worked at more than 50 different organizations. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm kind of weird that way.
And you were making fun of me.
No, it wasn't. Listen, I make fun of everyone. Okay. I'm an equal opportunity, making fun of an employer. So, one of the jobs I had was at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And speaking of being at the horizon of change, right? So at the commission, if something in culture was different or controversial, it would come to the Human Rights Commission, because that's like, okay, people trying to figure out, how do we wrap our heads around this issue and still maintain, equity and fairness. And one of the things I learned, and also from my own personal experience, is that there's who you are inside, like inside our brains, all the same kind of stuff. But then externally, it's what people see, right? So you talking about your grandson going out into the world. And then all of a sudden you bump into this thing of what people see and how people kind of treat you and how you're dealt with in the world. So it's kind of like somebody sees a farmer and they jump to conclusions, So
Yeah.
in your case, many of them are Trump supporters or whatever, but it's always like, what's going on behind the curtain? What's going on behind that? I don't want to divert from your momentum in the sense that the last image you gave is of these older people observe golden wedding date. It's a funny photo. I mean, to me, it looks like she could be holding a microphone stand, but actually it could be a shotgun. I don't know. It's like one of those things. So there's our external bodies, and then there's what's in our skulls, right? So
Yep.
Why don't you tie that all in with your 4 images?
Okay. Well, first of all, my grandchildren and my wife are self-explanatory. I don't want to leave my children out of it, but really, they're on their own now.
Mm-hmm.
So those two are self-explanatory. I have the life I have in part because of the risks my great-grandparents took.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that connection, and I feel an importance to not let them down, to be a decent human being and lead a productive life. And the Writer Shack, I gave that as a picture because it's a nice little illustration of what a weirdo I am. I think it is the only Writer's Shack with a grass roof and a Welsh and Norwegian flag about it, perhaps in all of Minnesota, perhaps the world.
I'll give you that for sure. Okay, well, Brent, look, these podcasts, well, these conversations go by. This has been great. One more time, the title of your book, link is going to be in the show notes, and I'm going to urge everyone to read it again.
Between the Helpless and the Darkness.
Oh, between the helpless and the darkness. That's life, really.
It is. Yep. And that's not a real spoiler alert, but that in my point of view is where a quote unquote warrior needs to stand, between the helpless and the darkness. You got to try and keep the darkness away from the people who can't protect themselves.
That is beautiful. Brent, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This has really been fun. I appreciate it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it